Hey, welcome to That One Time, the place for unforgettable moments and stories worth sharing. Funny, touching, surprising, just like life itself. Grab a seat, get comfortable, and let's dive in. When Sarah was struck by the news of impending motherhood, confusion overwhelmed her. Her main anxiety was that her parents were completely unaware of her secret romance. Sarah was barely 23 at the time. She was a young and trusting girl whose idea of love was woven from fairy tale images. This belief was instilled in her by the romance novels she devoured eagerly in the evenings, returning first from school and then from university. In every story she read, the main character was invariably a noble man, selflessly loving his equally beautiful chosen one and ready for any sacrifice for her happiness. It was then that Sarah came to believe in the existence of such feelings. True, requiring no proof, all-consuming. At 20, fate brought her together with a man, no longer young but full of a special charm, who managed to convince her of the sincerity of his affection. For Sarah, this man became the embodiment of the hero from her dreams. Their meeting took place within the walls of the institute where she studied, and he had arrived to give a lecture. Robert J. Davison's reasoning seemed so profound to Sarah, so flawlessly correct and coherent, that she listened, holding her breath, and after the lecture, it was her questions that were asked more often than others. Sarah herself studied political science, not under parental coercion, but out of genuine inclination. This interest was awakened in her by her grandfather, who was passionately engrossed in the state of affairs in the country and sometimes expressed very original opinions. Her grandfather had worked in a factory all his life, but he followed the speeches of statesmen, party leaders, and any political shifts with extraordinary zeal. It was his influence that prompted Sarah to link her future fate with this field. Robert J. Davison's speech at her institute, where he then held the post of city mayor, became a real event for Sarah. Firstly, she saw the mayor in person for the first time, and secondly, she had the opportunity to hear his view on the prospects for development both in the country as a whole and on the world stage. The mayor's speech completely captivated Sarah. She listened without interruption for the entire 2 hours of his presentation, while the other students yawned with boredom in the auditorium. Naturally, Robert J. Davison himself could not fail to notice such a listener so engrossed in his words. It seemed to him that the girl was captivated not only by his thoughts, but also by him personally. At least that was the impression he got during their first contact. After the lecture, Robert J. Davison himself approached Sarah. He extended his hand and introduced himself politely. "Good afternoon. My name is Robert J. Davison. I am the mayor of this city. But as far as I know, you are Sarah. It is a great pleasure to meet you." She shook the offered hand and modestly lowered her gaze. "Yes, of course, I know you and have heard a lot about you. Your city management strategy is very close to me, and your thoughts on the situation in the country and the world seemed profound." "You like politics?" Robert J. Davison gave her a wide smile. "In my opinion, ladies should not delve into this area." But Sarah could not agree with this, and a short argument ensued between them, the result of which was an invitation to a date from the mayor himself. "Sally, you struck me as a very sensible and reasonable girl. I hope you understand what I mean by inviting you, so to speak, to dinner?" Sarah nodded understandingly. She was well aware that the city mayor, burdened by family ties and enjoying undeniable authority, could not openly appear in public with a young student, even if her specialization concerned his field of activity. The evening conversation with Robert J. Davison completely turned her life upside down. The discussion captivated her more and more. She was impressed by his judgments, his views were close to her, and she could share thoughts with him that she could not confide in friends or relatives. Apart from her elderly grandfather, no one in her circle showed such interest in this topic. Therefore, meeting Robert J. Davison became a real outlet for Sarah, an opportunity for intellectual growth in the field that so attracted her. That evening, they only talked, and then Robert J. Davison drove her home in his official car. "What will I tell my parents where I was?" Sarah asked as they drove up to her house, realizing it was late. He took her hand in his and gently squeezed it. The girl felt the warmth of his palm and suddenly felt a special surge of tenderness towards this man. Never before had Sarah experienced such warmth, such spiritual closeness as with this older but endlessly interesting man. "Sally, tell them you stayed late with friends." "But that's not true. And can't you resort to lying for your parents so they don't guess about a secret date with a young man?" "Is our date a secret?" Sarah raised her eyebrows in surprise, causing Robert J. Davison a new wave of wide smiles. She preferred not to mention the young man, not daring to remind such an authoritative person as the mayor of his age. "You could say that. Imagine we had a real date, after which I would like to invite you for a second one." In a quiet, velvety voice, Robert J. Davison seemed to enchant Sarah. For a moment she felt special, the one with whom the city mayor himself wanted to go on a second date. But at home, no one asked about the reason for her late return. Her late arrival merely served as a signal for them that it was finally time to go to bed. The girls' parents worked at a textile and clothing factory. This enterprise was one of the pillars of their small town, and working there was considered a responsible job. Sarah's desire to engage in politics, far from their world, was received quite favorably by them. The reason was simple. Neither mother nor father understood anything about this field, but they saw their daughter's clear interest in an occupation not very typical for a woman, and they did not hinder her choice. Most of all, her grandfather rejoiced for her. He adored political broadcasts and foresaw a great future for someone close to this field. "Believe me," he told his granddaughter, "politics is something that no one really understands. If you grasp its subtleties, you will be able not only to skillfully manage and influence the necessary levers, both in the city and in the country, but also to know what others can only guess at." Sarah understood what her grandfather was talking about. It was there, at the top, that the fates of ordinary people were decided. And being close to the peaks of power, one could foresee the course of events and change one's fate, the fate of loved ones, in time. Therefore, Sarah had no intention of refusing to communicate with Robert J. Davison under any circumstances. And it wasn't just about his proximity to power, but also about the fact that she liked him as a man. Gradually, their communication lost its formality, moving into a closer channel. Unbeknownst to herself, Sarah realized that she had fallen in love with Robert J. Davison, and there was nothing she could do about it. She understood the inappropriateness of her feelings, as the man was married, but he himself was drawn to her, and she could not deny him the closeness he sought. Yes, Robert J. Davison was a demanding man, which was explained not just by his position, but by his ability to manage, influence the necessary levers, and press them in certain situations, as Sarah's grandfather had said. He was captivated by Sarah and did everything to gain her full attention, and he succeeded with flying colors. 6 months into their secret relationship, Sarah was madly in love with this man and ready to follow him to the ends of the earth. He replaced her father, friend, close person, lover. In Robert J. Davison, all the traits Sarah sought in a life partner were embodied. Despite her interest in politics, in her life, as in any woman's life, there was still room for love between a man and a woman. She drew examples of such love from novels, for there were no others before her eyes. Except perhaps her parents, whose relationship resembled friendship more than passion and mutual affection between loving man and woman. Several times, Sarah saw Robert J. Davison in the company of his wife. His wife was about the same age as him, over 50. They had no children, and they appeared everywhere together. Sarah never asked her lover about his feelings for his wife, and Robert J. Davison never made her any promises. They simply met several times a week. At times, it seemed to Sarah that he was just using her as a means of release, but at the same time, she understood that she could not break up with him, no matter how much she wanted to. Sarah thought with horror about what would happen if Robert J. Davison decided to leave her, trading her for someone younger and more attractive. The mayor was eyeing a higher position in the regional government, which meant moving to the regional center. It seemed to her that she would not survive this news, for her love for him was too strong and, as she saw it, unrequited. But Robert J. Davison remained silent for now, not mentioning the upcoming changes in his conversations with his mistress. Almost 3 years into their close relationship, Sarah felt unwell, and a visit to the doctor confirmed her fears. She was pregnant. What to do, how to be, the girl did not yet know. She even doubted whether she should tell Robert J. Davison. But he found out himself, almost immediately after the doctor gave her the test results. "Were you going to hide this important news from me?" Robert J. Davison's voice sounded frighteningly stern. Sarah was very scared then, for she did not like to anger or upset the man she loved. She shook her head and grabbed his hands, almost falling to her knees before him. "Robert J. Davison, forgive me. I just haven't fully grasped what happened myself yet, so I wasn't ready to tell you that I am expecting a child." Despite their long and close relationship, Sarah never dared to use the informal "you." He still seemed very adult and authoritative to her, and Sarah also saw how much he liked it when she addressed him formally. Robert J. Davison never once suggested she use the informal "you," and the girl knew how pleased he was when he was respected and his position was revered. "Perhaps the reason is that you are not sure it's my child?" Suspicion sounded in Robert J. Davison's voice. Sarah wanted to be offended but held back. Under no circumstances should she provoke this man's irritation, for Robert J. Davison preferred reserved women who knew how to keep their mouths shut. Hysterics and tears were strictly forbidden in communication with him. "That is impossible," she answered confidently. "I have never had anyone but you, so I have no doubt that this is your child, and you shouldn't either." Robert J. Davison smiled and hugged the girl. "Forgive me, my dear. I didn't mean to offend you. It's just that happiness is so overwhelming that I can't control my emotions. And my emotions, change like the weather, minute by minute." Sarah knew her lover's character and habits perfectly. She endured not only kind words and tender caresses, but sometimes fell under his hot hand when Robert J. Davison was displeased with something and thundered and lightened, making the girl hunch her shoulders and shrink into a ball. Robert J. Davison insisted that Sarah must give birth to the child. "This is my heir, the only one I have always dreamed of and never had. My wife unfortunately is infertile, and our marriage is childless. But this baby must be born and inherit everything I have accumulated. But how will I explain the child's appearance to my parents?" Sarah cried out in horror, clutching her head. "They won't survive the fact that their only daughter gave birth out of wedlock." But Robert J. Davison calmed his mistress, finding the right words. "Sally, my dear, your parents don't have to know about your pregnancy at all. We will arrange everything so that you live through your entire pregnancy in another city, supposedly doing an internship at a large company. You will give birth to the child, whom you will give to me and my wife, and after that, you will be free to do whatever you wish." Sarah, hearing Robert J. Davison's words, was horrified. "Robert J. Davison, you want to take my child? But this is my child. How can I give him away? He's not a thing. No, this is impossible." "What do you mean, impossible?" The mayor's voice took on a metallic edge. "Nothing is impossible for me. And who are you to decide what you want or don't want? I decide everything here. If I have decided that this child will be mine, so be it. But no one will ever know that my son was born to some student who was my mistress and protege for a while. Don't think too much of yourself. You are just a tool to get the person I need." Sarah listened to her lover, gripped by panic. Not only was she pregnant by a married man whose existence her parents did not suspect, but he also set a condition: to give up the child and forget about him forever. All her dreams and illusions about this man instantly crumbled into dust, scattered by a light gust of wind. Now, instead of a dear and reliable man, Sarah saw a cruel businessman who had made a decision from which he would not back down under any circumstances, and her future depended on him. "I am not offering you to do this for free," the mayor said, and then gently squeezed Sarah's fingers in his hand. "I will provide for you for many years. You will not lack money or housing, and I will also get you a wonderful and high-paying job. Only a fool would refuse such an offer. And you are a smart girl. You don't want to ruin your life and the lives of your loved ones, do you?" Now Robert J. Davison's words sounded like a direct threat. He hinted that in case of refusal, Sarah and her family would fall into disfavor, resulting in unbearable conditions created by this powerful man. "I don't want money and I won't give you my son," Sarah cried out, and tears streamed from her eyes. "I want to be with you. I want to give birth to this child, raise him together, be, if not a wife, then a woman close to you." Robert J. Davison laughed loudly, letting go of her hand. She looked at him with tear-filled eyes, not understanding what she had said that was so funny. The situation seemed hopeless, and he was laughing, instilling fear in Sarah. This man, though loved, remained inaccessible and ultimately incomprehensible to Sarah. "Who do you think you are, my girl?" He finally stopped the flow of hysterical laughter and looked intently at Sarah. "You imagine yourself my wife and the mother of my child? Beside a man like me, there should be a completely different woman, well-bred, mature, wise. And you? You are a stupid and snotty girl who knows nothing of life. Or do you think that because I slept with you, doors are open to you everywhere now?" "I love you," Sarah blurted out and burst into tears. She could barely comprehend what was happening, how she had ended up in such a ridiculous situation. For the first time in almost 3 years of relationship with Robert J. Davison, she confessed her feelings to him, said what she had kept in her soul for so long and so tenderly. He frowned, clearly displeased with what he heard. "And what now? Do you think your confession will change anything? I'm talking about love. I will be the mother, not someone else. All this time I tried to be the best for you, never did anything wrong, and now I'm just a snotty girl?" "That's right," Robert J. Davison replied coldly. "And now you either accept my terms or I will do everything to make you regret your refusal." "And what will happen if I don't accept?" Sarah asked in a voice trembling with horror, her tear-wet eyes gazing into the face of the man she loved. She hated herself for her feelings for this man who had trampled her into the dirt, but who remained the dearest and closest person to her. Even with her father, Sarah didn't have such a strong connection as with the married mayor who was about to take away her unborn child. "Your life will turn into hell," Robert J. Davison replied curtly. And that answer was enough for Sarah to make a final decision. She would not resist his terms, if only because a young woman with a baby in her arms is unwanted by anyone and is unlikely to arrange her personal life. And she also feared for her parents and the future of this unborn baby. Robert J. Davison had no children, and one could imagine the strength of his desire to get an heir, even if born from a fleeting affair with a young and snotty girl. "I am in hell now," Sarah mumbled, and then suddenly smiled. She would not object, for she was used to indulging him in everything and never expressing dissatisfaction. No matter how this man behaved, he remained the best for Sarah, which meant that all his decisions were initially correct. "You don't know what real hell is yet." Again, unexpectedly for her, he reached out and pulled the girl to him. She cried quietly, burying her face in his shirt, mentally hating herself and cursing the day she got involved with a man who had broken her life and made her completely dependent on him. That night, Sarah barely slept, pondering the decision she had made. She would give birth to Davison's child, receive money with which she would arrange her future. Robert J. Davison would not leave her alone anyway, and Sarah did not want to ruin the child's life. Let the baby grow up in a complete family. Let Davison be happy with his wife and future heir. Sarah would still remain the most important woman in his life, the one who bore him a child and sacrificed her motherhood for the man she loved. "Mom, Dad, I'm going to Moscow for an internship." Sarah announced her decision to her parents a week later. Before that, she and Robert J. Davison had discussed at length how her pregnancy would proceed. Staying in her hometown was impossible, and Sarah did not want to go to the regional center. If she was going to change her life radically, let it be Moscow, not a small provincial town. "You've never been there," Robert J. Davison replied, "and you have no idea what it's like to live in a huge city. I want to live in Moscow, and I want to get a good job after. You understand what I'm talking about. Now, having finished university, I cannot work because I am pregnant. I am losing a year of my life to make your life and your wife's life full and happy, and I want compensation for my sacrifice." Davison smirked, looking at her face. He clearly did not expect such demands. "You decided not to be petty," he said, his lips stretching into a smirk. "Do you think life in Moscow is sweet? Do you think if you get a foothold in the capital, you'll achieve something? You're empty, stupid, and naive. What can you expect with nonsense in your head?" Robert J. Davison continued to insult Sarah, but she decided not to be provoked. Before, he had said he would never get involved with a stupid woman, but now it turned out that throughout their romance, he had considered Sarah to be just that. She didn't say a word that he was the one behaving stupidly towards her. Sarah was still afraid of Davison and didn't want to fall under his hot hand. I have said everything I wanted to say, she replied, trying to make her voice sound confident and firm. If you do not accept my terms, I will be forced to tell my parents the truth. I dream of Moscow. I don't want to live here or in the regional center. I want more, and you promised I have the right to choose. I am running for governor, Robert J. Davison said. After I take that position, life in the region and in the city will change dramatically. You, however, choose a huge city where things will not be easy for you, and I won't be able to help, except financially. I don't need any other help, Sarah cut him off. Money is enough. You won't let me see the child, you want to take him away. Why would I want to see the baby you will take? Even if you think I'm stupid and empty, you must understand that I will be the mother of a child who will be taken from me. If you regret the decision in the future, there is nothing I can do, Robert J. Davison said evenly. You will bite your elbows, beg to fix everything, but I will not help. Keep that in mind. Sarah nodded. She understood that she was entering into a terrible and strange deal, as a result of which she would be left without a child, but with money. She had a choice. She could run away, leaving him without the child and without the possibility of threats. But Sarah didn't want to. She didn't yet feel anything for the baby growing inside her. She hadn't yet fully grasped the seriousness and consequences of the decision. A few weeks later, she was already in Moscow. She arrived by train at Paveletsky Station, took a taxi, and dictated the address Robert J. Davison had written for her. He had rented a 2-room apartment in Marino, and the girl went there immediately upon arrival. She was full of excitement. She wanted to unpack quickly and walk around the country's largest city until late in the evening. The landlady, who was waiting for Sarah near the entrance, gave her an indifferent look. She probably didn't know the whole truth about Sarah's situation and didn't guess why her rich and older lover, who decided to use a false name, was renting her the apartment. Andrew said you plan to live in Moscow for at least 6 months, the landlady said matter-of-factly while Sarah looked around the apartment. Hearing an unfamiliar name, the girl was initially tense, and then she realized that Robert J. Davison himself had introduced himself to the landlady as Andrew. Yes, that's right. I came for an internship for at least 6 months, but most likely longer. That's good. The woman nodded and looked at Sarah again. I need a tenant for a long term. Keep in mind, Sarah, parties and noise are prohibited in the apartment. Our district is good, the neighbors are decent, and your Andrew vouched for you and promised there would be no problems. Don't worry, it will be exactly as you said, Sarah replied, and she was already looking out the window, admiring the neighboring buildings. She had never lived in such a place. The apartment was huge for a 2-room flat, furnished with the latest technology. Even the dishes in the kitchen turned out to be French and very high quality. As soon as the landlady left, Sarah immediately dialed Robert J. Davison's number. I've arrived. Rest tomorrow and start work on Monday. The internship is real, so you'll have to work for at least 2 months. I don't mind working, Sarah replied. I'm even glad I can do something useful. Sarah was not being insincere. She really wanted to work and develop. After giving birth, having received money and financial freedom, she had to arrange her own life. And Sarah dreamed of staying in the capital and getting a chance to establish herself here seriously and for a long time. If Davison decided to pay her off, let him pay in full. Keep in mind, he said coldly, no men. You must focus on work and then preparing for the child's birth. If I find out you're meeting some Moscow loser, you'll come home and won't get a second chance at a happy future. Sarah inwardly resented Davison's words, but outwardly, out of habit, she said nothing. She, who had been seeing him for several years and had never looked at another man, was hurt to hear such dirty words. Sarah had never been frivolous or available. She loved and continued to love Robert J. Davison, despite his unfair words. How could she even go to bed with a man who said one thing to her face and considered her snotty and available behind her back? And why hadn't she seen so much bad in him before, as began to appear after they stopped being intimate? I have never allowed myself anything excessive, she said through clenched teeth, clenching her fists. I have never given you a reason to consider me loose. You had an incentive then. Davison chuckled into the phone. You were sure it would last forever. I was never sure of anything with you, Sarah replied, and then heard another stream of words about how stupid and naive country bumpkin she had been all the time she was sleeping with the mayor. Listening to the accusations and insults, Sarah silently thought that she only had to endure a little longer, and then she would be free and could do what she wanted. All these years next to the mayor, she had only tried to meet his expectations and not hurt his ego. Many men showed sympathy for her. Sarah remained faithful to Davison and did not respond to their advances. Among them were decent men with whom she could have built a serious relationship and a family. The conversation with her former lover left an unpleasant residue, and Sarah tossed and turned in bed all night, going over memories. Now it seemed to her that that time was so far in the past that returning to it or even just remembering it was foolish and pointless. A walk around Moscow calmed Sarah down a bit. She walked the streets, looking at beautiful houses and expensive cars. She imagined her future life, in which she would also have a good apartment in the center, a luxurious car, and a loving man beside her. She would definitely have a family, children, and a future that would certainly be happy and carefree. These thoughts made it easier to breathe, and her mood improved. Sarah tried not to think about the coming months. "This is just my job," she reasoned, thinking about both the pregnancy and the internship. "I will just fulfill my duty, for which I will receive money and the opportunity to live better." She diligently reassured herself, still not fully understanding how life would turn out after she handed the child over to Davison. She didn't see the picture clearly because a hope flickered inside that the mayor would change his mind and simply provide for both her and the child. Perhaps sooner or later, Sarah would even become his wife, and then she would turn not just into a happy woman next to her beloved, but into the mayor's wife, and perhaps by then, the governor's wife. Until the child was born and Robert J. Davison took him, the hope for change for the better still lived in Sarah's mind. The next morning, she headed to the office of the company where she was to intern. The journey did not take long. The caring and calculating Davison had rented an apartment only 2 kilometers away, and Sarah didn't even have to use transport. In recent days, she had been severely nauseous from strong smells, so traveling in a crowded bus or subway seemed unthinkable. Walking along the Moscow streets to work, she thought again about how caring Robert J. Davison could be. It wasn't for nothing that she loved him. The mayor wasn't so bad, even despite their strained relationship. At the administrator's desk in a small business center, Sarah arrived at 8:45. She was slightly nervous as she had never worked before, and this chance for an internship and then employment was a lucky ticket for her. "Here is your pass." A pretty girl at the desk handed her a plastic card with the word "guest" on it. Looking at her beautiful nails and perfect hairstyle, Sarah thought that someday she would definitely become just as chic, expensive, and confident. For now, she was just a girl from the provinces who, thanks to an influential person, received not only a pass to this building, but also a chance at a promising company. "And how do I find the company prospect?" Sarah asked, and then felt someone touch her arm. Turning around, she saw a handsome man of about 30, smiling at her with his hand on her elbow. "Are you Sarah A. Miller?" he asked, and Sarah found it funny. No one had ever addressed her by her first name and patronymic before. She was 23, had just finished university, and wasn't used to such an address. She smiled at the pleasant man and noticed the administrator, who turned out to be incredibly beautiful, giving him an interested look. "My name is Sarah, Sarah A. Miller." The man removed his hand from her elbow and extended his palm. "Peter Smith, Deputy Director of HR," he introduced himself, and Sarah couldn't take her eyes off the girl devouring Smith with her gaze. There was clear attraction, which Peter paid no attention to. "Will you show me to my workplace?" Sarah smiled again, trying to look friendly. How she liked it here. She had only stood in the lobby for 15 minutes and was already in love with this life and the opportunities that beckoned. Of course. Together with Peter, they took the elevator to the 5th floor. Other people were with them, in whose eyes Sarah saw the whirlwind of Moscow life. Life in Moscow seemed like a fairy tale. Peter led Sarah to the reception area where she was to work. Promising an internship, Davison hadn't warned her that she would be temporarily acting as an assistant to the general director. She was to sit in the reception area, register documents, and receive visitors. That's how Peter briefly described her duties. For her, with a degree in political technology, it was strange to work as a secretary. even with the fancy title Specialist in Documentation Support for Management. Peter managed to beautifully outline Sarah's future prospects. He specified that with a successful internship, she would work in the company as a political PR specialist. Sarah listened to Peter with her mouth open. It seemed she had entered a parallel reality where doors to a completely different life, whose existence she had not suspected, were opening before her. She liked the work, but she wanted more. She saw the kind of people who came to the general director, wealthy officials, future deputies striving for career heights, before whom a bright future was opening. Sarah also wanted to participate in this. She dreamed of doing what she loved, participating in politics, promoting someone to success. She wanted to have such a promising politician nearby, grateful for her work and showering her with expensive gifts. "You're doing great," Peter told Sarah a few weeks later. During this time, she had never been late. Her diligence pleased the director, and she was allowed to participate in the PR campaign of an influential politician, a major client of Prospect. Sarah worked and felt that she was in the right flow. The work was enjoyable, and she liked seeing the results. Hearing such words from the deputy director was pleasant. Now she was appreciated, and her future seemed more promising. "I really like working here," Sarah admitted, and smiled widely at Peter. Besides work, she also liked Peter Smith, who reciprocated her feelings. They had lunch together several times, went to the cinema, and Peter also suggested going to St. Petersburg on the weekend. "The general director is thinking about opening a branch in Petersburg," Peter said, "and we could not only see the future offspring of Prospect, but also see the city." Sarah agreed without hesitation. She had almost forgotten about her condition. The pregnancy was approaching 3 months, and the morning sickness and drowsiness had subsided. At times, it seemed there was no child inside, so accustomed had the state become. Only ultrasounds confirmed the fact of pregnancy. Sarah was not going to refuse the trip because of this. She wanted to see another city, the future branch, but most importantly, to be near Peter, who seemed very interesting and attractive. Why hadn't she met him earlier? Peter was smart, educated, and sensed the right direction for development at the right time. Sarah liked such persistence and intuition. With each passing day, she became more convinced that Smith was the man she could be with in the future. If not for this pregnancy, on the other hand, if not for her condition, she wouldn't have ended up in Moscow and wouldn't have met Peter. Robert J. Davison called approximately every 2 or 3 days. He asked only about her health and the progress of the pregnancy, never once asking how his former mistress was doing working at a large PR company. Sarah also kept silent about her communication with anyone. She hoped Davison was calm. She also kept quiet about the trip to Petersburg with Smith, not wanting to provoke his anger and desire to control her life more thoroughly. "Tell me, who is Davison to you?" Peter asked in the morning as they were drinking coffee near Leningradsky Station 40 minutes before the train departed. Startled by the unexpected question, Sarah looked at him fearfully, a million possible answers swarming in her head, choosing the right one becoming an impossible task. "He's a friend of my father's," she lied, feeling an unpleasant lump in her throat. "And why did you lie?" Peter didn't believe her. "He simply asked for you. I know Davison is going to run for governor, holds a high position in the region, and has every chance of winning. It's just that you yourself never mentioned his name, as if you ended up at Prospect by chance. But it wasn't by chance, was it?" Sarah picked up her coffee cup and brought it to her lips, trying to cover her face. Peter would quickly read the truth on her face. She needed to hide her eyes and end the conversation. But changing the subject quickly was not part of Smith's plan. "Your father, who is he?" Peter asked, and Sarah felt the blood rush to her cheeks. She felt hot and nauseous. She did not want to tell the truth about who Robert J. Davison was to her under any circumstances. "My father is a simple factory worker," Sarah replied. "He's Davison's friend? So close that the mayor himself cares about his daughter's future?" Peter smirked. Sarah felt that he didn't believe her. Telling the truth was also impossible. Otherwise, everything she had kept silent about would be revealed. Her connection with Davison, the reason for her arrival in Moscow, her delicate condition. "Yes, a good friend." She looked Peter confidently in the eyes. "What's so strange about that? Can it be? Can a mayor be friends with a simple person?" There was defiance in her voice. Sarah had learned tactics. The best defense is offense. Many people at Prospect behaved this way. And in general, life in Moscow was such that it was better to act defiantly than to try to prove something, especially if you were lying yourself. No, why? Peter suddenly smiled. I'm just curious how you ended up at our company. I know Davison, and that man doesn't do anything just like that. I personally handled his promotion when he was running for mayor, so I know what I'm talking about. I heard he has a mistress in the city, young and beautiful. For some reason, I thought it might be you. Sarah felt her heart pounding faster. It seemed Peter knew everything, just testing her and giving her a chance to confess. But Sarah wasn't going to do that. Under no circumstances could she admit that she was the mistress everyone, even in Moscow, knew about. If it were me, she replied, continuing to look Peter defiantly in the eyes, he wouldn't have sent me to Moscow. Why send his mistress so far away? Peter smiled. Perhaps you're right. Although I've often heard how influential and rich men dump mistresses who have become undesirable. It's common practice. Sarah remained silent. Indeed, Davison had dumped her like an unnecessary part of his life that could be flushed down the toilet and the button pressed never to meet again. Of course, they had some things in common, but that wasn't a reason for the relationship to develop further. On the contrary, a period had been put to their romance, which remained in the distant past. Peter didn't talk about Davison anymore, but an unpleasant feeling lingered. Her mood was spoiled, and the trip didn't seem so romantic. On the train, Sarah felt sick again and ran to the restroom several times. In St. Petersburg, on the first evening, Sarah and Peter walked for a long time, hiding from the sudden rain under the awnings of old buildings. At one point, when Sarah wasn't expecting it, Peter pulled her to him and kissed her. That night, they slept together. For the first time in several years, Sarah allowed another man to be with her. These were new feelings, unlike those she had experienced in Davison's arms. This could be called passion, even love, a bright flash that suddenly illuminated everything around and blinded Sarah with its brilliance. She returned to Moscow completely different. Peter held her hand, and their relationship was nothing like the one she had with Robert J. Davison. Thank you for everything, she thanked Smith warmly as he walked her home. It was an incredible trip. You are incredible. He smiled and kissed her again. Now their relationship had moved to a new level. Sarah didn't dare invite him to her rented apartment. She was afraid that Davison would find out about these meetings, and only God knew how he would behave if he learned about the mother of his future child having a relationship with another man. A few weeks later, Sarah began to notice changes in her appearance. Her belly rounded, her breasts enlarged. Hiding the pregnancy was becoming more difficult. Sarah tried to limit her meetings with Peter, realizing that it would lead to nothing good. Why don't you want to come to my place? Smith asked with hurt when Sarah refused a date with a continuation for the third time. I don't feel well, she lied, thinking that lying had become her life. But telling the truth was also dangerous. If Peter found out about her condition, the relationship would end, and Sarah didn't want that. What she really wanted, the girl herself didn't understand. She had to make a decision because in a few weeks, everyone would guess her condition. That day, when Peter cornered her in the break room, Sarah's heart was pounding. She was preparing for a serious conversation, like an approaching storm that was useless to resist. Why are you running from me? Peter's voice rang with indignation. What's going on? Is there someone else? Didn't you notice? I'm not like most women. If your ex cheated on you left and right, it doesn't mean everyone is like that. Then why? He asked and stared into her face. Why are you avoiding me? Sarah sobbed. I don't want rumors about us. As soon as the internship is over, let it be as it will be. But for now, I don't want everyone to see what's happening between us. What does it matter what others think? Peter grabbed his head. I'm going crazy thinking about you, and you're hiding as if you don't need me. Sarah no longer held back, quietly crying and wiping away tears. Peter hugged her, held her close, and said softly, "Marry me." Sarah looked up at him with tear-filled eyes, blinked several times, not believing that everything happening wasn't a dream. Are you serious? You want me to be your wife? I do, Peter breathed out and held her even tighter. I'm going to Petersburg for 2 months. I need to participate in the development of the branch, personnel selection. Your internship will end soon, and I want you to come to me. We'll live together, we'll get married. I'll help you get a job at Prospect in Petersburg. Sarah almost choked on the overwhelming emotions. Peter was telling the truth. No one had ever offered her their hand and heart, and here was such a promising man whom she liked and with whom she was ready to go to the ends of the earth proposing. What should she do? After all, in 5 months she was supposed to give birth? Her head was spinning with thoughts. She had to decide something, to answer. I agree, she blurted out. A few days later, Sarah saw Peter off at the airport, and she herself, happy and anticipating a carefree life, wondered how to stall until the baby was born. A ring sparkled on her finger, looking at which, everything inside turned over with happiness. She and Peter called each other every day, several times. Sarah eagerly awaited the end of her internship to go to her parents. She invented a story for Peter about a sick grandmother who needed care. Her grandmother had been dead for a long time, but Sarah really wanted to go home and visit her parents. I hope your grandmother gets better, and you'll move in with me, Peter told her, worried about the delayed reunion. I miss you. I miss you so much. Me too, Sarah sighed. We'll keep calling each other every day, and I'll try to come as soon as possible. She arrived at her parents'. Wide dresses and hoodies helped hide the pregnancy, and none of her family noticed the changes. Her mother and father asked about her life in Moscow, looked at her workbook, admired her intelligence and abilities, not knowing how their daughter got into such a large company. After arriving, Sarah went for a walk in the park. Sitting on a bench by the pond, she stretched her legs with relief and turned her face to the sun. It was August, a wonderful time when the heat had subsided and autumn had not yet arrived. Sarah smiled at the sun, thinking how correctly she had acted with the child, and with Robert J. Davison, and with Peter, and with her future. Resting? A woman's voice sounded nearby. Sarah turned around anxiously and almost gasped. It was Eleanor Davison, Robert J. Davison's wife. Sarah had seen her in person a couple of times. The rest of the time, she looked at photos of her rival in newspapers and on the internet. Go on, sit, don't be afraid. Eleanor smirked, seeing the fear on Sarah's face. I won't eat you. We need to talk. Sarah glanced at Eleanor. For her 50 years, she looked good. There was no gray hair, her hairstyle was perfect. She was dressed fashionably, but not gaudily. Her skin was wrinkle-free. She looked about 45. What do I have to talk about with you? Sarah asked, and moved to the edge of the bench. About what's happening in your life that directly concerns me and my husband, Eleanor replied calmly. Or do you think I know nothing? Neither about you nor about the changes you're preparing for us? Sarah was silent. Of course, Mrs. Davison knew everything. Davison didn't hide his affairs, and it suited her that he sought pleasure elsewhere without bothering her. All the mayor's property that he didn't want to reveal was registered under Eleanor's name. Besides that, even more real estate and assets were registered under her mother's name, which an honest mayor couldn't have. Davison was not honest, so he hid everything, registering it under his wife and mother-in-law. Both spouses were satisfied. Eleanor had a business, Robert J. Davison had a mistress, and they both had a strong marriage based not on feelings but on calculation. I know Robert got it into his head in his old age to become a father, Eleanor said, looking intently at Sarah. He doesn't know yet that I don't need this gift of fate, not even for free. Sarah stared at Mrs. Davison in surprise. What do you mean, don't need? The girl asked. Didn't you want a child? I never wanted children. Eleanor cut her off, and squinting, looked at the sun, then at the river. It's beautiful here. I like my life, and that I have no obligations to children. I don't want children. Is that clear? Sarah felt a chill down her spine. What would happen next? Would she and Davison refuse the child, and she would have to raise him herself? No, that arrangement didn't suit her. She had agreed on something completely different. So? She asked in a trembling voice. What are you offering me? Money, she shrugged. A lot of money and your disappearance from the city and the country. I will pay enough so that you, the child, and your parents won't need anything for several years, and then you can arrange everything yourself. That's not what I agreed to, Sarah mumbled, feeling nausea rising. I don't need this child. Neither do I. Eleanor cut her off, got up from the bench, rummaged in her handbag, which cost as much as a good used car, and handed Sarah a business card. Call me when the passions cool down. Thinking with a clear head is better. She left, and Sarah, holding the business card, suddenly trembled. Taking out her phone, she dialed Davison's number. "Robert J. Davison," Sarah whispered. "Your wife. She doesn't want the child. What should I do?" Silence hung on the other end. Sarah nervously fiddled with the business card, waiting for the answer from the most influential person in her life. Surely Davison couldn't cancel everything. He wanted a child. He did everything to get one. Sarah, on the other hand, definitely didn't need this child anymore. She was going to get married. She had plans for her life, into which the appearance of a screaming infant didn't fit. "Go to Moscow," Robert J. Davison said coldly. "Be out of the city by tomorrow. I told you right away. Don't dare come back and remind me of yourself. No one should know about your pregnancy, and you, as usual, acted stupidly." "But what about your wife?" Sarah asked insistently. "She doesn't want—" "Shut up, Miller. I'll deal with my wife myself, and you leave." He hung up, and Sarah crumpled Eleanor's business card and threw it into a trash can by the river. The next day, the girl left for Moscow, not intending to return until the child was born. She told her parents about getting a job at another company and a bright future in the capital. They rejoiced for their daughter, not guessing the truth that would have been a blow to them. Sarah continued to communicate with Peter. The pregnancy now seemed a huge obstacle on the way to her main goal: becoming Peter's wife, moving to a big city, getting a decent job, and living comfortably. Sarah also dreamed of working, remembering her grandfather. She was proud of herself, because now she had an education and a chance for promising employment. She just had to endure a little longer. The pregnancy was past 6 months. Her belly was clearly visible. It was October, and outerwear didn't help hide her condition. It became obvious. When Peter came for a date, Sarah again invented lies about her grandmother's poor health and her inability to travel. How much longer Peter would endure this lying, Sarah didn't know, but she already understood that she was walking on the edge of an abyss. One clumsy move and all her plans and dreams would shatter. Meeting Peter was unexpected. Sarah was walking through the supermarket and suddenly heard someone call her name. The voice was so familiar that her heart ached with despair and the realization of the end of a happy life that hadn't even begun. Peter looked at Sarah in shock. Because she had a protruding belly, and calculating the timing, Peter couldn't help but understand that his fiancée was not pregnant by him. "I'll explain everything," Sarah mumbled, but from her fiancé's face, it was clear that no explanations were needed. And what could she say? A fiancé who had been living in Moscow for months, leading her beloved on, and pregnant by who knows whom, could no longer remain his fiancé. "I don't need any explanations," Peter said through clenched teeth and extended his hand. Sarah, with tears in her eyes, took off the ring and placed it in his palm. That was the end of it between them. Without unnecessary explanations or hysterics, they just happened to meet in a store, exchanged a few phrases, and ended their story. Sarah was in a panic. Now she had no fiancé and no bright future. She was almost 27 weeks pregnant. Davison's control and thoughts of his wife who didn't want the child haunted her. Davison came to Moscow in December, a month before the birth. He was dry, spoke to Sarah through clenched teeth, seemed distant and uninterested. "You will give birth at the perinatal center where my friend works. After the birth, you will sign the refusal, then you can consider yourself free. I don't need you anymore." Sarah listened silently, experiencing a spectrum of feelings, from self-pity to hatred for this rich man who spoke such words. There was 1 month left, after which her life was supposed to change. Robert J. Davison promised to rent her an apartment for a year, after which she was supposed to manage on her own. Labor began precisely on New Year's Eve. After suffering through December 31st, by 9 in the evening, Sarah was on her way to the perinatal center, suffering from pain and the desire to get rid of the child as quickly as possible. The doctors, tipsy, put Sarah in a ward and left to celebrate. She suffered, screamed, called for help, but a nurse looked in and snapped, "Stop screaming! It's a holiday, and you're screaming like you're being tortured. Do you think you're the first or the last one giving birth here? What a big deal." When the bleeding started and Sarah began to lose consciousness, the doctors rushed in. The girl passed out from pain and weakness, waking up in the morning. "Did I give birth?" she asked weakly to a girl in a white coat near the exit. She turned and smiled slightly. You did. You had a boy, almost 4 kilograms, a real little elephant. Can I see him?" A few minutes later, the newborn was brought in. Taking him in her arms, wincing from pain, Sarah didn't feel a surge of happiness or awe. She held the baby, and this moment seemed the happiest in all her 24 years. Small hands, a pink nose, dark hair, all so familiar, incredible, that Sarah was frightened. It became scary at the thought that she would have to give up this miracle, and she was not ready to do that. The next day, as she was feeding her son, Davison burst into the ward. "What the hell?" he roared. "Why is she feeding the child? I told you, as soon as she gives birth, take the baby away." He forcefully snatched the child from Sarah's arms, and she, wanting to object, saw the enraged Robert J. Davison and fell silent. He carried the child out, and since then, Sarah never saw her son again. They brought her documents. She signed them silently. Inside, everything was tearing apart from pain and regret, but nothing could be undone. With her own hands, she signed the documents refusing her son. Sarah tried to call Davison, but he didn't answer. A man in a black suit brought her several stacks of money at the hospital. It was the payoff. For this money, Sarah sold her child, as she had wanted. Only now, everything inside turned over with self-hatred, contempt, and longing for the baby who seemed the most precious and important person. "We are discharging you, but we strongly recommend you visit the women's clinic," the doctor said sternly, handing her the documents. "You need further examination and treatment." "Treatment?" Sarah asked indifferently, looking at the documents. "Why? What for?" The doctor looked at her in surprise. "You had a difficult birth, as a result of which you lost the ability to have children. Didn't the doctors tell you anything?" "What?" Sarah stared at the man in the white coat. What was he saying? A stupid joke or Davison's attempt to finish her off? "How did I lose it? I can't have children anymore?" "Unfortunately, no," the doctor nodded. "Here's the diagnosis. You should see a doctor as soon as possible to prescribe hormone therapy." Sarah left the hospital on shaky legs. In her bag were documents stating, in black and white, infertility, difficult birth, surgery, the cause of infertility. She could forget about a bright future with a real family and children, but somewhere there was her son, the only one whom she had given away to his father for severance pay with her own hands. After visiting another doctor, the diagnosis was confirmed. Sarah was in a panic. Plus the hormonal changes after childbirth. She cried constantly, felt short of breath, and was tormented by nightmares. In rare moments of sleep, she dreamed of the baby in her arms, whom Davison was taking away. In these dreams, Davison was a monster with red eyes, flames bursting from his mouth. The terrible man remained terrible even in her dreams. She broke down, went to her hometown, looked for Davison with his wife and child. Only once did she see Robert J. Davison with a stroller. She didn't dare approach. She was afraid of this man, capable of destroying her and her family with a snap of his fingers. Returning to Moscow, Sarah tried to forget everything. She got a job as a secretary, moved out of Davison's apartment, and relocated to the Moscow suburbs. From there, she commuted 2 hours each way to work daily. The long commutes were exhausting, but Sarah didn't complain. She didn't want a family or children. She transferred all the money from Davison to the account of a children's rehabilitation center, not keeping a penny for herself. The money felt dirty, having defiled her life. A year after the child's birth, Sarah calmed down a little. She met a neighbor and a friendship developed. A few months later, it grew into something more serious, and by spring, Sarah moved into David's one-room apartment. "I want you to meet my mother," he announced solemnly. "She lives in the next building, and until now, I haven't dared to tell her I have you." "Why?" Sarah was surprised. "You're 30. Why hide your personal life from your mother?" David hesitated. "It's just that Mom is still upset about the divorce from my first wife. She loves Lisa very much and can't forgive me for deciding to divorce." "And why did you divorce?" Sarah asked without much interest. Although she liked David and felt good with him, she didn't have strong feelings like she did for Davison or Peter. It was as if someone had removed the censor responsible for loving men. "She cheated on me," David replied curtly. Sarah decided not to pry into his personal life. David's mother was clearly not happy that her son had moved in with a newcomer. Native Muscovites didn't like people from out of town, and Ann M. Peterson believed her son deserved better than some country bumpkin. "Sarah, what do you do?" Ann M. Peterson asked, pronouncing the name unfriendly and peering intently into her face. Sarah, trying to maintain her composure, replied, "I'm a secretary. By education, I'm a political technologist. I worked at a PR agency, then I quit and got a job as an assistant manager." "Why didn't you continue working in your field?" David's mother asked curiously, continuing to bore into her with her gaze as if trying to see through her. "Because I'm sick of these officials," Sarah wanted to shout, but she restrained herself and tried to smile. "Maybe someday I'll return to that field," she replied. "For now, I'm satisfied with the position and salary." "Yes, salaries are good in Moscow," Ann M. Peterson smirked. "Not like in your... Remind me, where are you from?" Sarah smirked, feeling David's mother's dislike on her skin. The woman loved her son dearly, but did not approve of his choice and his decision to live with Sarah. A month later, he proposed to Sarah, and she accepted. Not so much out of great love, but out of a desire to create a family and live peacefully. A life without children. Sarah didn't tell David about her infertility. They lived together. In their home, there were concerns about her husband, cleaning, constant thoughts about the child living far from his mother and not knowing the truth. Sarah followed Davison's life, knew that he had become governor, beating his opponent by 7%. There were rumors that Sarah and Eleanor Davison could not have children, and the governor's family used the services of a surrogate mother. Few knew that this mother was Sarah. The boy was named John in honor of Robert J. Davison's father. He was a year and a half old. When visiting her parents, Sarah always tried to see little Johnny at least from afar. She would go to Davison's house and, hiding behind trees, watch. There were rumors that Robert J. Davison was going to move to the regional center, and then the chances of seeing Johnny would become slim. Life with David was not like the fairy tale Sarah had invented 2 years ago. They lived quietly, too quietly for a happy marriage. David said nothing about children, and Sarah didn't confess that she couldn't give him an heir. "I don't love him." This thought pricked her like a needle from within. She said tender words to David, but felt nothing for her husband except gratitude and the opportunity to live in Moscow. This was not love, but something gray, a hopeless dark tunnel running through her entire life. "You got married, but you're not having children," her mother said with resentment. "Why don't you and Dave have children? Is it too early?" Sarah realized that she didn't like the life she was living. Not because it wasn't the one she dreamed of, but because the most important thing had disappeared on that New Year's Eve when she ended up in the perinatal center. Sarah found out by chance that David had another life. Leaving for work, halfway there she remembered she had forgotten to turn off the soup. The thought of a fire chilled her to the bone. She returned home, and as she entered the apartment, she heard Ann M. Peterson's voice. Her mother-in-law, as always, was managing things on the phone. And she didn't turn off the soup. What's in her head? Probably all sorts of lovers. She was telling David that he had made a mistake marrying her. Empty, stupid, cold as a fish. She doesn't love Dave and he doesn't love her. Sarah froze, listening to Ann M. Peterson's words. Here they were, the very words she should have heard long ago. Cold and stupid. That's how her husband's mother saw her, and that's how Sarah saw herself. Cursed. For these shortcomings, she would bear her cross. Did she want this? No. Lisa is expecting his child, her mother-in-law continued. Sarah stood in the hallway and listened. Yes, Lisa is pregnant by him. And Dave wants to look good so much. He just hasn't gotten rid of his love for his first wife. He'll go back to her, you'll see. We must get rid of this country schemer immediately. Sarah ran out into the stairwell but didn't go to work. She went up to the top floor, waited for her mother-in-law to leave, and rushed into the apartment. She threw things into a bag, wrote a note to David, and went to the train station. She needed to go home. She needed to deal with the hell that had been going on for the past 2 years and get rid of it. David called when Sarah was halfway there. Returning, he found the note and confessed. Yes, I can't help my feelings for Lisa. Then go back to her. Raise the child, Sarah replied, feeling neither jealousy nor anger. She didn't love him. How could he love her? Their marriage was an attempt to forget the past, but neither of them succeeded. "Be happy," Sarah said and hung up. From the station, she didn't go to her parents, but headed to Davison's house. She was going to kneel and beg Robert J. Davison to at least let her see the child. Sarah was ready for anything, just to try to bring her son back into her life, her only native child. There would be no others. Eleanor opened the door. Tear-stained, pale, she stared at Sarah without blinking. "What are you doing here?" she asked. "Come to dance on graves?" "On what?" Sarah looked at Eleanor uncomprehendingly. "I want to talk to Robert J. Davison about Johnny." "Are you joking?" Eleanor asked and burst into tears, sliding down the wall. Sarah caught her, helped her to the sofa in the living room, and then saw a little boy standing hesitantly by the entrance. Her heart pounded wildly. It was her son. "Johnny boy?" Sarah whispered and smiled. The boy smiled back, and inside, a huge iceberg seemed to crack. "Take him," Eleanor cried out. "I don't need him. Now that Robert is gone, I don't need your child. I never needed him. You imposed him on me and Robert." "What happened to Robert J. Davison?" Sarah turned pale, hearing Mrs. Davison's words. "He died," she replied, grinning. "A heart attack. Take the boy and get out." Sarah approached her son and scooped him up in her arms. Johnny clung to her neck, gripping with his thin fingers. "Who are you?" Johnny asked as they got into the taxi. "I'm Sarah." She looked into the boy's eyes and wiped away a tear with a barely noticeable movement. "Let's go somewhere, and then I'll tell you everything." They were going to Sarah's parents' house. A difficult conversation lay ahead, then dealing with the child's documents. "The hell is over," she thought, squeezing her son's little hand. "If this hadn't happened, I would have gone crazy." She hugged Johnny and held him close. The boy didn't pull away, drawing patterns on the glass with his finger. Sarah inhaled the scent of the child and smiled through her tears. She had never felt such feelings before, and hardly anything could compare to what was happening inside. And it was simple, unconditional happiness.